and welcome to this episode of The Defenders, in which we are going to look at how to tackle the Chinese threat with the collective capability of our armed forces, not just on the Himalayan front lines, but beyond that, beyond the Himalayas, into terrain where China doesn't have the capacity to inflict the kind of damage that it threatens to do to India. At the same time, in the maritime domain, where we have considerable advantages vis-a-vis the Chinese, more so at a time when the standoff with the Chinese has gone beyond the 1 year period in the Ladakh area, but the Chinese have also begun to make threatening moves across the front lines of Arunachal at the McMahon line, and how we could respond to that at a time when it is becoming increasingly evident that the Chinese do not wish to go beyond the earlier set of dialogues where India was able to get the Chinese to disengage from our front lines in Ladakh. What next? What could follow? And how would our responses be? We have our experts who will help us understand the Indian capability and capacity that goes beyond the troops on the front line through air power and through our maritime strengths in this episode of The Defenders. Hello and welcome to this episode of The Defenders, where we are looking at yet another dimension to the India-China standoff, and that is the air and the maritime dimension, and how India can confront the PLA forces perhaps far, far more aggressively than it could in some of the other domains like cybersecurity. And we have two informed experts with considerable experience on such issues as our guests. We have Air Marshal Bhatia with us, who has been AOC in C of not one command, but three commands of the Indian Air Force. That is the Central, Southwest and the Western Command. Welcome on the show, sir. And we have Captain Alok Bansal, who is now a well-established commentator on issues related with national security. But I'm going to ask him to educate us more on the maritime dimensions of the Sino-Indian dispute, on which you have, as I've read your writings, written quite extensively on areas around Jammu and Kashmir and what is with Pakistan and China. But I'll start with you, Air Marshal Bhatia, sir. Over the years, the one area where I found quite reassuring was the proactive approach of the Indian Air Force to the Chinese on the Himalayan front, well before matters became what they became after the confrontations of April-May 2020. For example, you set up advanced landing positions. You also reactivated Daulat Beg Oldie. You also came in as a game changer when the pushing and jostling led to confrontations and deaths. So give us a broad perspective of what all the Air Force had in its mind, particularly yourself, you would have seen from Central Command, and how you looked at the China factor. Let's focus on China for a moment and the Indian Air Force.
Yes, after a lot of, shall we say, thinking in the past that China was not an immediate threat, as we all know, at the turn of the century, things started to change. And we now know that China is a major threat. In conformity to that kind of an assessment, it was necessary for us to build the necessary capabilities, both in the northern sector or the western sector, as also in the eastern sector. So as far as infrastructural capability is concerned, it's been an ongoing process. Over a period of time, in the Ladakh sector, for example, we went, as you mentioned, reactivated DBO. We also activated NEOMA airstrip, made it operational and carried out landings there. If you recall, during the 1962 operations, we were in the front valley towards the LAC in Chushul and Fukche. But that being so close to the LAC, it was considered not a good position for an airfield to be. So we came one range behind and activated Neoma there. Then, of course, we had activated Kargil earlier. We made Thais and Leh capable enough to be able to have routine fighter operations, for example. So all that was done in the Ladakh sector. In the Arunachal Pradesh sector, there were many, ALGs earlier which were in a state of neglect, which have now been made operational. Let us say Dapijo, we have Along Walong, and you have Zero, etc., etc. There are a large number of Pasigat. There are a large number of these ALGs which have become now fully operational to be able to take on, heavy transport aircraft, for example, and in an emergency even fighters, in some places.
Very well put, sir. Comprehensive enough. Captain Bansal, it is often said, and I've myself said so in some TV debates, that to ease the pressure on our land forces, particularly the Chinese pincer movements as they are being cited in Ladakh area, we could shift the attention and divide China's strategic focus from the land Himalayan frontier by playing up on our advantages in the maritime sector. And in the maritime front, I am told, at least for now, we enjoy certain advantages up to the Straits of Malacca. Could you elaborate?
See, we need to understand that as far as Indian Navy is concerned and Indian Ocean region is concerned, we definitely have a decisive edge over PLA Navy.
Okay.
But at the same time, I must tell you, this edge is getting eroded. Say about 10 years back, we had a significant edge. In fact, Chinese Navy did not have any air support, did not have any aircraft carrier, did not have a good maritime reconnaissance aircraft, they did not have good anti-air capability. But now it is said they have 2 aircraft carriers. Though again, acquiring an aircraft carrier is far different from operationalizing it and getting used to operating from carriers. I have my doubts about PLA pilots' capabilities of operating from Chinese carriers as of now. So, and consequently, we haven't really seen those carriers move very far away. So now they are in a position to at least venture into Indian Ocean region with some sort of an air support. But as I said, the geography bestows on us an enormous advantage. If you look at the way Indian Ocean is, and we have an unbridled access to the Indian Ocean, whereas China, its geography actually prevents it an open access. And that's one of the reasons, I think, probably why China has been extremely aggressive and trying to claim this 8-dash line and all, because it realizes that geography does not allow it a free access to any oceans. It has to pass close to some country or the other. Now, if we have a good position in Andaman and Nicobar Islands, we can virtually track every ship or every vessel that's coming into the Indian Ocean region through Southeast Asia. And in fact, Indian Navy, I think of late has been carrying out a patrol south of Great Nicobar, where we are actually monitoring even the merchant traffic. So we know what sort of a traffic is taking place. That's a very, very important development, which I think gives you enormous confidence in times of conflict. Because unlike on land, maritime conflict is a very complex scenario, because you have not only neutrals, you have merchant ships and issues like that. So once you are monitoring the traffic, you know what is the sort of traffic, what is the quality of traffic. So it gives us a decisive edge. And China is extremely dependent on resources passing through Indian Ocean region. Not only crude oil, but even raw material comes from Africa to a very great extent, and its products are also coming to this particular region. Because China's economy, as you know, has boomed basically on foreign trade. Now, if that foreign trade is curtailed, the decisive edge which China has by becoming the factory of the world will get curtailed.
Okay, yeah, very well brought out. And I'll come back to you on the limits to China's ambitious Belt and Road Initiative, which is part of China enhancing its footprint even further. But 3 points that come to my mind. I think there has been generally a lack of strategic understanding in India about the strengths of having the kind of navy that we have and how to build up on it. And that has led to lesser funding for the navy as compared to what the navy's ambitious plans are all about. And finally, we cannot rule out the fact that while we were going cautious and slow, the Chinese were going full on with development, and I'm told, if not now, in a few years, they'll have the largest navy in the world. So they are spending a lot on, and comparatively, therefore, we are looking to be not that well equipped. I know you will counter those with your own defenses, but I'll come back to you. Air Marshal, sir, I need to understand, there's a fact, if that is a fact, that China not only has an edge over us in terms of cyber and AI capabilities, but to what extent would that be a threat to our air operations and that of the punch that the IAF intends to pack in the event of escalation on the Himalayan front?
Very good question. The point is, there is no doubt that in the field of cyber and AI or artificial intelligence, China is leagues ahead at the moment. But how much of that can impact on the operations in the case of things hotting up, let's say across the Himalayas, is something that we have to look at. But before that, we must also understand what is the asymmetry which is existing between, let's say, the Chinese or PLAF, Chinese Air Force, and the Indian Air Force. And we all know the asymmetry at the moment is huge. But we must also take into account as to how much of that capability can impinge in the Ladakh sector or across the Himalayas in the eastern sector against India if there is a conflict which takes place.
May I just extend my question with a point that you just made? We saw in 1962, and you mentioned about 62 in your earlier answer, that China gets often very distracted with its ambitions in Taiwan. And in 62 also, though they had accumulated a large number of Russian-supplied aircrafts, they were focused largely on Taiwan, and that was something we had not taken into our assessment when the government of India under Pandit Nehru chose not to use the Air Force, amongst other reasons. Could you connect that with the existing situation where China is again focusing more on Taiwan, and therefore in the event of a hot border situation, would that asymmetry really be the asymmetry in terms of numbers or in terms of punch that the IAF can still pack?
Yes, as you said, in 1962, the Chinese Air Force capability in Tibet, for example, was practically next to nil. But it was our wrong assessment that the Chinese Air Force was, could cause a lot of damage in case we use the Air Force. And this question is always there, it looms large. What would have happened if we had used the Indian Air Force in the combat role in 1962 operations? Personally, I'm convinced that things or the outcome would have been very different.
Completely different. I'm also convinced.
And I think even the Chinese accept that logic right now. Now, we move fast forward to the present situation. As we all know, that the Chinese Air Force is by an order of magnitude in terms of numbers better than the Indian Air Force. While they are continuing to build up their forces, our combat forces, for example, have been on the decline in terms of number of combat squadrons that we can field today. But once again, we have to look at how much of their air power can be brought to bear against India in case of things going wrong. And there you find that the entire scenario starts to change a little bit. It is also a fact that China today, very feverishly trying to improve their infrastructure in terms of airfields in Tibet proper. And they are also going ahead with building, blast pads and so on and so forth. They have also reinforced their major airfields, for example, in Hotan and Kashgar and so on and so forth, which can also bear, into Tibet. But there is a limit to how much the Chinese Air Force can do in Tibet. And our advantage is that most of our airfields are in the plains, within, striking distance of targets in Tibet, without any penalty on the payload. Whereas the Chinese Air Force operating from high altitude airfield will have to do that. And today, of course, we have the force multipliers as well. And if we can build on that kind of force, then we have a far-reaching capability even to reach their mainland, airfields and other targets across Tibet.
Right.
So what I'm trying to say is that we should not look at Chinese Air Force as 10 feet tall vis-a-vis Indian Air Force. Yes, the asymmetry is there, but not as much as we cannot deal with. And we can deal with it quite effectively. But what is very necessary is to build up or run a combat force.
Yeah, that is the ongoing requirement. And I think, my only counter to that is that if we have to build up a combat force, we should do it early and as soon as possible and not wait for LCA Mark II to come when Mark I has not yet come into the Air Force.
Absolutely.
And time is not going to wait for us. But Captain Bansal, there are two things that I think you need to explain people further. I have seen historically every economic strategic initiative has a military dimension. You'll probably agree. And China's Belt and Road Initiative, it seems to be a kind of benign economic initiative, but there is a military element built into it, both in terms of what it is doing in the China-Pakistan economic corridor and building a whole lot of cyber networks there, extensive underground cabling, but even in the high seas, they are going to be using all that they can muster up against us. Now, the need to understand is that is China, in the words of Paul Kennedy, going into a strategic overstretch?
See, historically, any route that's been taken by traders has also been taken by soldiers. In fact, if you look at it, even Aksai Chin, that's one of the areas where traders and soldiers only moved through that because it was a barren land. And so, when you talk of BRI, all these prongs through which China intends to push trade could also be used to push soldiers and military hardware. So, to that extent, irrespective of what China claims, there is a military dimension to it. And some of those areas are very, very clearly seen. Like in Gwadar, there is a naval base coming. Pakistan has time and again said that we are offering it to China. Chinese Navy will be positioned. Though China keeps denying it, there are reasons why they keep denying it. But we know the Chinese statements keep changing depending on circumstances. Similarly, in the maritime arena, now if the merchant ships are coming, now their warships have also started coming, then merchant ships start getting escorted by warships in due course of time. So, the movement of navies to follow merchant ships is always there, and that could always happen. And China's emergence as a big economic power gives it that strength that many small countries, which are economically not so well off, would want Chinese shipping to come there. And when the shipping starts coming, the navies also start coming. We have seen there are many countries in the Indian Ocean where Chinese warships and even submarines have visited in the past.
Sri Lanka is one.
So, as I said, I did not wish to name the countries, but there are so many of them where they are coming. So, that shows China's economic muscles and the capacity of their navy. Because historically, if you look at it, since you talked of history, let me clarify here. Historically, Chinese Navy never came to Indian Ocean, in fact, after post-independence. And please understand, the Chinese Navy's build-up initially was focused on Taiwan. So, they had large number of small craft which could be used to cross the Taiwan Strait. The way they had captured Henan, as you know, 49 they did not have Henan also. They captured Henan by crossing from the mainland and capturing Henan, and they were working on that pattern till Taiwan. But the point is, as long as Chiang Kai-shek was alive, Taiwan was at a state of perpetual war. So there was a requirement for a certain amount of military hardware to be kept facing Taiwan. Now Taiwan faces a threat from China. Today China does not face a threat from Taiwan. Let that be very clear. No Taiwanese leader says today, even President Xi doesn't say that we are going to capture China. It is not that thing.
They don't have the capacity.
So they don't have the capacity, nor do they have the intent. So restructuring and repositioning of assets is that much more easier for them today. Similarly, they also didn't have a pressure with Russia, like Soviet Union with which they had a problem in the past. So that is also not there. So to that extent, China's capacity to reposition its assets, both on land and at different places, is far more today.
Okay. Okay. So, yeah, so that's some very important points you've made. And I'm going to come to you in the end for something which only you can wisen us, I'm sure. Air Marshal, sir, quickly, can I understand from you that China, it is reported, has begun to move its air defense forces and capabilities along the LAC, and there are reports also of extensive preparedness on the Eastern Command of the Army in terms of the McMahon Line and Arunachal. Is there an understanding in the Air Force that despite these forces having been moved up, the Air Force can still get the better of them?
Yes, there is no doubt, as I mentioned earlier, that the Chinese are feverishly building up on their infrastructure as far as the air power is concerned, by not only constructing new airfields, but also improving those airfields to take on the fighter aircraft and so on and so forth. There's no doubt about that. And as you mentioned, they have also moved their air defense systems into Tibet. There were some there already positioned, but they are now moved in. And there is also a report that maybe the S-400 has also come close to that area. But similarly, after this Galwan incident took place and things hotted up in East Ladakh, the Indian Air Force has also moved their air defense systems into that area. And as I said earlier, we have been operating our combat aircraft, we have been doing regular patrolling there, our Chinooks are there, our attack helicopters are there, and Akash air defense missiles, everything is there. But the point is, today, how is the situation? As I said, that the situation is something that we can cope with. The terrain itself actually helps a lot in terms of evading the capabilities of air defense systems like the S-400.
Okay, so to take on Captain Bansal's point that geography gives us advantages not just in maritime domain, but also in the air domain.
Absolutely.
Captain Bansal, last question, short answer please. We have been engaging extensively with the US. Strategic partnership has led to some weapons platforms, but also concern on the part of China that we are getting too close to the US, and that is one of the reasons why China's back went up in '62 also. Do you feel the US-India arrangement, Quad and what have you, is something we can count on?
I don't think so. In fact, the fall of Kabul and AUKUS are two developments which actually seriously raises questions about reliability of the United States as an ally. We need to understand in this confrontation, we are the frontline states. None of the others are there.
Absolutely.
So they could provide you material support, but none of them are going to jump into the fray. US-China trade still continues to be extremely high. US economy to a very great extent is dependent on China. US dollar is dependent on Chinese investment into the bonds. So will US enter into a direct confrontation? No. Quad is useful because it positions Indian economy, it tries to build up Indian economy as a contender to China. So to that extent, what is our advantage is that we hope to get investments into India and also get technology which probably moves away. Because please understand, at this point of time, China is leapfrogging in the technological front. As far as AI is concerned, China is actually now moving ahead of the United States.
Yes.
So
yes.
there are issues where we need to counter it. And I think for that countering, we need support from Western technology and investment.
I'm completely out of time, but I agree with you entirely. And I think there are lessons that are there for us to see and note in terms of how we have other advantages vis-a-vis China and not just the gut and grit of our soldiers on the front line. But thank you very much for being with us and thank you for watching. Until our next episode, goodbye.